Okay, so now over to Mary.
Yes, let me welcome you also. And I notice that Professor Valpura is there as well. It's wonderful, from Brazil, and all of you who've
made a number of other Brazil colleagues from the project.
It's wonderful. The relationships were formed over the years with many of you, and it's lovely to see you together. This conference is really a significant kind of inflection point for us. This last year, we've all had to, as Bill said, transition and tackle online, remote, in person, all the complications involved with designing and delivering education to learners who, like the instructors, are living through this very stressful moment. So none of this was done easily. None of it was done as part of an experiment. None of it was done as part of an educational challenge. We went through these forced experiences under unprecedented difficult circumstances. However, Bill and I have been involved in talking about the affordances of the digital for a very long time, even before this, because we believed the future required educators to harness the affordances of the digital to expand their repertoires. But today we're going to just talk about, how do you transcend social distance and what does it mean? What does remote mean and what does online mean? So my first definition is about what is online learning? And it is this the first one? Yes. So our definition is very simple. It's learning interactions supported and connected by digital devices. Now, it's really important that technology has always existed in teaching and learning, whether it's the technology of the book or the technology of the classroom, but the digital has brought something else to us. So online learning involves connected to digital devices. The second definition is remote learning, and remote learning has been with us for a very long time also. It's learning at a distance in space, right? And historically, it used to be we send out mail, materials in the mail. So the remote learning, which we use now for digital learning, in fact, in terms of definitions, there's nothing new about that at all. Now, my third definition is the virtual, because we talk about that all the time. And what digital has allowed is meanings at a distance, in space and time. The virtual allows us to connect in ubiquitous ways, in multiple ways, in ways that we weren't able to connect either through the remote of the past. So the definitions for us, first of all, online is not a synonym for remote, although we use that word, and we have to be clear about that. And the modalities involved for online, it can happen in person, with online support, or it can be remote. So in fact, the online is not only tethered to technology. And why is this semantics important? It does matter. The online infrastructure that's available to us offers certain pedagogical potentials that are in fact the same for in-person and remote. And we believe we need to understand that. So I'll just move to the next one, Bill. Thank you. Online education. First of all, I'm going to give you a very super brief historical snapshot of something that has been a very long history, and a history that starts at the University of Illinois, where we actually are. In 1959, a group of scholars here created what was called Plato. And in fact, it's over 60 years now. It was the first online delivery program of education. And it created a number of remarkable things that remain with us right up to today. So the keyboard, that was a brand new thing that was able to carry language via computer. That was a revolutionary innovation. The plasma screen, which is now used in all sorts of areas from medicine to education, it was pixelated and it was able to carry text and image. And also it was a touch screen. You can see here that the young woman who's working it is actually touching the screen. And they patented this in 1964, which was quite a long time ago. So we need to understand how long these tools have been in development, and the fact that they anticipated also the kind of analytics that are available to us now because of the incidental recording of what we did through these devices. Right? They talked about them as a talkomatic tool, but in fact the talking happened through the typing, and this in itself was revolutionary and actually in our lifetime. At the University of Illinois also in 1998, on the right-hand side, you can see Mosaic, with 1993, right, sorry. In 1993, the very first web browser was invented, again here at the U of I. And in 1998, in the College of Education here at the University of Illinois, was the world's first fully online degree, and it was HRE, Human Resource Education, online. And it continues to this day to be a #1 program in the country. Now, what you have here on the left-hand side is what the kind of intervention that MOOCs created. They were about being disruptive. The people who were involved in the MOOCs wanted to create a situation where scholars who were resistant to engaging with the online would begin to think about what this meant. It was free. It went out into the world as an experiment. It sourced superstar professors in order to encourage people to dip in and see what was there. And in fact, at our university, we have now 5.8 million enrollments, right? It's just grown in all sorts of extraordinary ways. And what we've put here for you is just to see our courses. We put all our courses that we taught face to face, and now we teach online. We put them in the MOOC environment because we wanted to experiment. We wanted to see what happened. We wanted to know who took them up and why. And there's a lot to be said about that, but I won't at this moment. On the right-hand side, of course, is our own website where we teach regular students in an online environment. So it's possible now at the University of Illinois to go from a free MOOC, just a single course, right through to a doctoral program. The affordances and the access issues have become really significant. Then, as you know, this work has been going for a very long time. 99% of professors in universities and educators in schools resisted online, resisted the digital, because the gold standard was face-to-face in a classroom. Education is a human endeavor, you have to be together. But once COVID arrives, everyone has to go remote, whether they like it or not. It has had extraordinary ramifications, positive and negative, but it's changed everything for us. So the three things, that were already in crisis. So if we take the access issue, there's been a long conversation about who gets to go to university or colleges. Is it just a place for elite, wealthy people? How can ordinary folks, mothers, workers, how can they access education? That's been a long-term conversation. And then the second one was the issue of resourcing. We've seen in the higher ed sector, in the college sector, a reduction of public resources and a shift towards fee paying. So the issue of resourcing and access become, quite a critical issue for the higher ed sector, even before COVID. And finally, attentional. what kind of students are coming to us? What kind of meaning-making patterns do they have, whether they're shopping online or whether they're connecting via Facebook or Twitter? And, you know, the traditional classroom had a very, very narrow cognitive load, you know, whereas now most people are moving backwards and forwards, multitasking, using the digital in multiple ways, not in any particular singular way. How are we as educators looking at this crisis, the type of people we have, the resources that are available to us, the crisis of access? How has the digital and the necessity of all of us to go online and be remote, how do those three things come together, and how do we understand them for ourselves as we design and deliver education that is just and fair for people of all backgrounds? So I'm going to hand over to Bill now, I think. Turn to the next one, Bill. So more than to support remote, you know, what can online contribute to learning? Really, that's the most important thing. How can learning be enhanced?
So I'm going to go back a step, and I'm going to do a kind of contrast between some of the key objects. You know, when we talk about e-learning, we're talking about media. What were the historical media? And in fact, these historical media in human terms, if you think of the life of our species, there's 100,000 years, 200,000 years, were invented relatively recently. I'm going to talk about some of those founding artifacts and how e-learning can fundamentally transform these artifacts. So what we've got here is, I'll just move that out of the way, okay, is the lecture. This is one of the things we do. And this is the famous quote of St. Benedict about the master and the teacher. You know, all the students sit and listen in a lecture theatre while the students are, while the lecturer is speaking. You know, you can't have too many people speaking at once. Perhaps one person will put up their hand, but it's essentially a relationship of speaking and silence. Oh, sorry, I've gone one step too far. So that's social distance number one. Social distance number two is this one here, the textbook. So this is a relatively modern invention. The textbook, the lecture, by the way, you know, St. Benedict, the Western monastic tradition, this kind of didactic relationship was in the 6th century, but it's medieval essentially, and it's initially a European invention. The textbook is really from the 16th century, from the century after the invention of printing. And this is one of the most famous educators that you've never heard of, because his role was so sorry, just got to go back to that now. This is Mammalona Petrus Ramus, who took knowledge. In this case, it was Euclid, classical knowledge, which was formatted very, very differently in its original form, and put it into little chunks, went from the simplest to the most complex, built diagrams, built a table of contents, built an index, and this was the curriculum. All the students would then be on page 16 in chapter 3, and they'd all be there at the same time, but they could silently and individually by themselves work on this knowledge. And it was essentially a transmission model. Here's Euclid, read the book. And by the way, at the end, what we're going to do, and this leads us to artifact number 3. Well, I'm getting to artifact number 3 in a second. The model here, both for the lecture and for the textbook, is essentially what we call didactic pedagogy. And we're using the word didactic in the way it's used in English, which is a kind of authoritarian. It's not didactic in a neutral sense. It's got all sorts of connotations to it. And the model is essentially a hub and spoke model, transmission, which Paolo Freire called banking education, Dewey called the transmission learning, and it's generic. We're all listening to the lecture at the same time. We're all watching the textbook at the same, reading the textbook at the same time. And then, wait there, where's the, oh, this is artifact number 3. Which is, okay, how do we know what you've learned? You've listened to the lecture, you've used the textbook. How do we know what you've learned? that what we do is we have a test. And what learning really means, and the question I want to ask you is, do we really want it to mean this, is long-term memory. It's stuff you can't bring the book in, you can't talk to anybody else. It's what you've managed to remember. Definition of long-term is a delay after the test, because it doesn't matter if you forget it afterwards. And it's the kind of the separated brain, the unsocial brain. You can't go for social resources like books, you can't look things up, and you can't talk to anybody else. So it's highly individualistic. Now, this comes together as didactic pedagogy, and then online learning comes along, which again we've defined not as remote, but using these digital tools. And guess what? Nothing changes. The basic pedagogical assumptions are all the same. There are the kids, they're doing their own work.
All on the same page?
All on the same page. They're getting tested for their memory at the end. And so we have e-textbooks, no different from regular textbooks. We have video lectures, no different from video lectures. We have all these old artifacts, and all we've done is digitize them. And by the way, a little bit of history on the right here. B.F. Skinner's teaching machine of 1954, as Mary said at the beginning, these things have been a long time coming. It's not as if they turned up yesterday. So the issue is that we can use these online learning tools and reproduce everything that was problematic in terms of legacy pedagogy. We can reproduce didactic pedagogies as if nothing's changed. We're just using digital tools and we're mechanizing those historical processes in different ways. Now, there we go. They're the three things that have been simply mechanized.
And during COVID, these are the things that were mostly used.
Right, right. And kind of understandably in a way, because it's what teachers are used to doing, right? But the question I'd like to ask everybody now, how much have we done beyond these three things? Now, the R&D work that Mary and I have been doing in the College of Education has been trying to imagine, well, how might things be different? And this is the CGScholar environment. And what I'm going to do for a moment is I am going
not just different, but enhanced.
Enhanced, yeah, different and better, right? So how can we use these online tools, both for in-person classes and remote classes, in a way which enhances the learning experience? So I am going to just jump out now of here and go across to a web browser. So I'm going to start share. I'm going to stop sharing. Do a new share, and I'm jumping over to CGScholar Live, and now you should be seeing CGScholar. And what I did like 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, is I just simply went in and I'm going to show you things that are happening in Mary and my classes are different. So when you log into CGScholar, the first thing you see is a profile page, which looks like social media. I don't have friends and followers. That's not the right idea really for education. I have peers and I belong to communities, which are classes. These are knowledge communities where people are working on learning stuff.
And we have to say that CGScholar was invented and is in experimental stage in order to test what the affordances of the digital were for the values that we have in learning.
So I'm going to show you a couple of kinds of things that are happening here. Instead of a textbook and instead of lectures, we have a community. So this, by the way, is all the things happening in all my communities, and it's an infinite scroll, just like all social media is. This is digging down into a class that Mary and I are just, it's not quite being finished. It's a class that we were just teaching, or we're still teaching now. We're just finishing this off. And we have a scroll down here of all kinds of activity going on.
Where everybody is speaking.
Where everybody's speaking. So one type of activity, I'm just going to scroll down here, is an activity on, so I'm going to go into one of we have a thing that we call an update. And this is what's different from the traditional lecture. So here, this is a post, this is a post made by a student. I thought it might have been one of our posts. So I'm going to go back 1 second and I'm going to filter to show you, because there's a lot of activity happening in here. and I need to filter to show you what it is that I am, an example of what we call an admin update. So the concept we use is not a teacher, but an admin, which is a conventional social media
so the
idea.
Curator of content, and
Right.
the delivery of content, and the managing of content.
So week 8 in this course, or update 8, was on differentiated learning. So when I go into here, you can see here a number of short videos that Mary and I have made. But the videos are not there for us to tell, they're really for us to prompt dialogue. So this is a dialogical approach as opposed to a monological approach. And by the way, here's an article that we've written and whatever. So what we do is we ask people, make a comment, let's talk about this. And see below there, this is not like St. Benedict. This is everybody's talking, and they're talking to each other. And more than that, we expect everybody to talk, which can't ever happen in a conventional class.
And they can do it in text, they can do it in video, they can do it in audio, because of the affordances of the multimodality allows that to happen in these spaces.
Now, what I'm going to do now is go back to here. And what we're also doing is we're recruiting our students as co-designers of the course and collaborators. So this happens to be, and I'm just doing this completely at the, just whatever's happening right now. This is actually posted 13 hours ago and I haven't even seen it before. This is a post that one of our students made about video essays. Now, the truth is, Mary and I don't know as much about video lessons probably as this student does, because she probably works with them. She's got a reference in there, and you can see the other people are then discussing that. So for us, it's a thing where we become co-designers of a learning community. It's not just a transmission model of activity.
But the teacher still needs the deep knowledge for scaffolding the learning and for designing the instructional sequences and engaging with learners.
Now, again, this just happens to be, this, by the way, is in a space called community, which, if you like, is a virtual version of the classroom. But even when it's in person, this is a very good set of tools with which to be dialoguing. It means I don't have to just talk to the person beside me. I can talk to the person at the other end of the class. And then, and then, by the way, in terms of the flipped classroom idea, we've put the videos in there, and we can really use the classroom for dialogue rather than lecturing.
And all the members of the community receive each other's posts as well as the teacher, and the teacher sees individuals as well as the whole.
Now, one more example. I've now gone into this second app within Scholar called Creator. And by the way, folks, just to mention on the side, because you folks are all at a Common Ground conference, you have access to Scholar. You can use this with your students as well. So what we have here is a peer-reviewed project where this particular project, and it's really an arbitrary one that I happened to pick up because it just was there from yesterday, is somebody talking about online interaction in MOOCs. And see, is this a conventional essay? Well, no, it's got videos in line in the essay. It's got infographics. There's George Seaman speaking about something. It's got, so this is a genuinely multimodal text. But also it's a social text, because what's happening along the way is while the person is writing their work, they see an assessment rubric. They can, when they see somebody else's, they can give an assessment and check out what the rubric is and the rating levels here. So what we're doing is we're actually delegating the assessment work to the other participants. And then what they can do is they can then see all the feedback other people have given them. That's a summary. This is one person's feedback. And you can see here they can talk to each other about the feedback. And there's a huge amount of feedback coming in. And it's a collaborative knowledge production exercise in which assessment is absolutely central, but it's not like that blinkered assessment that you saw in the previous model. And in fact, what happens is, they do a first draft, they give each other feedback, they do a self-review, and it's about constructing social knowledge, but assessing it along the way with these rubrics. Because look, along here, we're actually looking at quantitative results as well, based on human judgments. So here we go, this person's been rated very highly, and we're crowdsourcing that. We're doing collaborative assessment.
So peer review is at the core of the pedagogical approach and can be realized with this digital technology.
One last thing before we go back and close off with some generalizations about these changes. we are data mining this activity all the time, and this is this particular class, right? So it's the same class that you just saw. You saw a peer-reviewed project, you saw some of the discussion going on in the community, and every single piece of work the students do is shared, social, visible to each other, because after the projects are peer-reviewed, they get shared in the community, so it's collaborative knowledge building. But then we have these analytics here, where we're data mining everything. Now, this course is not quite finished yet, and these are a series of measures that we have here.
In three important areas, equally important: knowledge, obviously, focus, how engaged they are in the digital environment, and absolutely equally important is help, the degree to which they help each other succeed, because remember, peer feedback is core and central. The collaborative mind, collaborative knowledge making is critical to us and is made possible by the technology.
And look, this is a 7-week course with 30, 40 students from memory in this particular course, and there have been 5,737 pieces of actionable feedback. Remember, at the end of a course, you get a mark or something. Well, that's not very good feedback, and it's not actionable. And this is every little bits of peer feedback, peer interaction, peer commentary. And in fact, we've data mined 1.3 million data points. Now, along the way, each one of these things, every student has one of these astroplots. And along the way, what it's possible to do is see exactly how that data was calculated. This is big data, artificial intelligence, but absolute transparency about the basis of the calculation. So you can just mouse on this to see how the calculation happens. So 100 is the circumference of the circle. And we say to students, look, if you get 80, you get an A. If you get something else, you get an A+. And you just keep working away at it on all these measures, and you're in charge of your grades.
So why are we saying this to you? We want to demonstrate that it is possible to harness the affordances of the digital for something better than what we're getting now with the LMSs that exist out there and the tools which are upload, download, a quiz at the end. It is possible to have more human-centered, engaged teaching and learning where there is a team of educators and students who are working together to create knowledge.
Again, back to our basic concepts that Mary kicked off in, this is equally valuable as a tool for in-person and remote. So we've got online learning and we can use it in both scenarios or blended scenarios for that matter. So I'm going to go back now to the PowerPoint and we're going to draw some conclusions now to what we've just been talking about.
So rather than just professing about this, we just showed you a small slice of what, we've put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and demonstrated what is possible to do.
Well, the money, by the way, is we've been very lucky to have grants from the US Department of Education. So we've got to thank them, and now's the time to do it. US Department of Education, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the National Science Foundation. So
and we want to stress that it takes computer scientists, educators, philosophers, designers, that the new pedagogy requires cross-disciplinary collaborations.
And by the way, we manage this through a not-for-profit Common Ground Research Networks. Everyone at Common Ground conferences can use this, and we have now about 250,000 accounts a year, which in the scale of the web is tiny, but in terms of our modest work as academics, we're rather proud of that. So I'm going to go on now and talk about some conclusions, and 5+1 learning transformations, 5 transformations for learners and 1 for teachers as a consequence of that. So firstly, this is social learning. The other learning was highly individualized. So we've got peer review discussion forums, and we're not focusing on cognition, the stuff that you've been able to remember and regurgitate in a test. We're focusing on your artifacts that you make, your peer review projects, the posts that you make. Knowledge artifacts is our focus. The collaborative mind. And also we're interested in the questions of privacy and transparency. So there's no data that we're getting that we're not also immediately giving to you. your own data, not the class data, of course. We get the class data, but every bit of data about yourself is transparent to you. And what we're doing is we're moving from this model, remember this hub and spoke model, down here to this more complex social model where the teacher is still incredibly important because they're facilitating and they're coordinating a learning community. The second thing is equitable learning. So here's the normal distribution curve. And by the way, the person who invented this, Henry Goddard, you know, we quite like the idea of 115 to 24 as above average, and we'd like to be gifted 125 to 34, and we'd like to be a genius at 145. But in fact, here are the terms at the other end, which is 0 to 25 is an idiot, 26 to 50 is an imbecile, and 51 to 70 is a moron.
They're the words used.
They're the words used for intelligence testing. This is where it came from. But when we put our kids across one of these, or our learners across one of these curves, we're insisting that a certain percentage are morons and a certain percentage are imbeciles. And we're, in a way, what Mary and I call this is an insistence on inequality. We insist on unequal outcomes. And what we're trying to do in Scholar is we're trying to say, look, mastery learning, you can all do what's on that circumference. Just keep working at it. You might do it at the same pace. You might need to put in additional effort, but you can all get there.
But the infrastructure might need to change, and the timetable and the periods might need to be more flexible than they are in a traditional didactic infrastructure.
Engaged learning. We want you to be active knowledge makers. You're not just sitting there listening to the lecture and you know, at the end we're checking out whether you've remembered. You're not just reading the textbook and again checking out that you remembered it. We're getting you to build knowledge. So here on the right is a medical student building a clinical case analysis rather than just answering some medical question, which is commonly the case in medical education.
And he has a team, or she has a team responding to them, as they would in any genuine, authentic medical context.
Then what we say is deep learning. So the model you saw, the historical model is about long-term domain memory of facts and correct application of procedures. I got the sum right. Now, I might have understood it, I might have accidentally got it right, or I might have understood it and accidentally made a mistake. You know that problem. But also it's mentalism. It's simply thinking, okay, what's in my individual brain is learning. But what we're interested in is complicated higher order thinking, creative thinking, design thinking, thinking in action, social thinking.
But it's not an either or.
It's not an either or, but in a sense that, you know, traditional pedagogies reduce learning to what we would call superficial learning.
Right.
And then the fifth point is about recursive learning, which is to end the distinction between formative and summative. We just don't do the assessment at the end. We're giving a recursive feedback along the way, which builds your learning. And our assessment data is based on feedback which you can act on, actionable feedback. Right. And in that, we want to actually end the distinction between instruction and assessment. Assessment's going on all the time, and it's an integral part of instruction, as opposed to instruction comes first, assessment at the end. And also there are incredible possibilities, which we don't have time to talk about today, but we've been working on these in our research team about machine learning and artificial intelligence, how the machine can actually enhance human interactions because the machine's learning from your interactions as well as you learning from the machine. So this is a dialogue. And you know, yes, AI is problematic, machine learning is problematic, but there are also things that we as educators need to leverage.
But we want to encourage you all to consider how you become involved in the design of the tools that are available and the affordances of the digital, which takes us to.
Yep, and not just they're the 5 learning things. Well, in fact, it's about teachers.
Yes.
So the job of teaching is going to change, right? It's, you know, and so the job of teaching doesn't change when we just use online tools to do the same old stuff.
Right.
We're advocating a reform of teaching and learning. But also online is a productivity tool. It's pragmatic. You know, we can do things better. We can do a better job. We can avoid incredibly boring tasks like the 40 identical essays at the end of the term that you've got to put a mark on. We can get the machine to help us with that. We can get peers to help us with that. So it's about improving the work life of teachers as well. So here's our conclusion. the future of online learning is the future of all learning.
Right.
So,
as long as we design it, as long as we imbue it with the values that matter to us, as long as it focuses on the human participants, right, and not just sequencing content, which is what traditional curriculum did. You had gatekeepers who produced the textbooks, and then you had to do lockstep in the delivery, and then you had a test at the end that was, you know, standardized, as if humans are standardized. Nowhere in life is that kind of learning the way people engage with the world. And the digital has enabled affordances, right? If we draw them out, if we engage with them, if we shape them in order to do the things that we want, rather than say, no, you know, it's just a face-to-face experience and we'll use the old tools. So that's what we try to do in our work, both as practitioners and as researchers, not just to talk about the future and the potential, but demonstrate in our own way what you can do and what impact it has on infrastructure, and the need for collaborative design and collaborative delivery by educators in collaboration with computer scientists, engineers, artists, etc.
So folks, we have about 15 minutes probably where we can have a bit of a discussion. So does anybody have any questions? Now, unfortunately, because we were showing our screen